Hello, and welcome to My Week in Baseball. I'm your host, Phil Estruth Harrison. You're listening to episode number 11. This episode is published as a podcast on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, and is also available in a video version on YouTube. So you have many ways to enjoy the show. As always, thanks to Ari Estruth of Brunjo Productions for the intro music created especially for this show. Learn more at brunjo.com. That's BRUNJO.com. Today, we'll talk about something that got loose on the field, the world's most softly hit home run, Shohei Ohtani and his impact on fantasy baseball, and defensive shifts and their impending banishment. Of course, we'll also have a timely Blimerick, our blast from the past, and the cap of the day. So let's get right to it. Okay, we'll start with today's cap of the day, which if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see is a Seattle Mariners cap. Now, a version of this was first introduced in 1993. It was teal and blue. That's a blue body with teal brim and a teal accent button on the top. So the main body color of the hat was blue. The version I'm wearing is actually the opposite. It came out a year later in 1994. So it has a teal body with blue trim and a blue accent button. It's got the traditional block S in white in the center. It has a compass with a baseball in the middle inlaid over the S, which has been a traditional part of the Mariners logo, at least in that era. And that's the 1990s, what I'll call the Ken Griffey Jr. era. So it is a teal body, mostly teal, the blue brim and the blue accent button. It's one of my favorites from the Mariners. Okay, next on to something from the fun department. Well, this game got a little squirrely. On June 20, during the Pirates-Cubs game, 3 groundskeepers had to chase down, well, you guessed it, a squirrel. It got loose in the left field corner. So one of the groundskeepers ran after it with a bucket. Another one had a net, although interestingly, the holes in the net were far too big to catch a squirrel. Now, maybe it would have worked if they were out to catch a larger animal, maybe say a zebra or something. Anyway, they ran back and forth trying to get it out in left field, first to the foul line, and then heading back towards center field from the foul line. It found a hole in the metal gate that was leading into the left field bullpen and disappeared into the bullpen. The animal bolted right through. I am not sure what happened to it or how the relief pitchers felt about it, keeping company with their friend, the squirrel. Anyway, the Pirates ended up scoring 3 runs in the inning, so they may need to hire the squirrel to distract the opposing team more often. Next up, how softly can you hit a home run? The answer, 85 miles an hour. This occurred on June 21 when Harold Ramirez of the Tampa Bay Rays lofted one on a high arc to the shallowest part of left field, directly down the line at 315 feet over a very low wall. It had the lowest exit velocity of any home run in the StatCast era, which began in 2015. Now, the story of this game really should have been that rookie Isaac Paredes hit 3 home runs as the Rays beat the best team in baseball, the Yankees. Coincidentally, Paredes is batting .273 with 9 homers on a pace for about 25, has an OPS of 817, which is good for an OPS plus of 135, 35% above league average. The Rays acquired Paredes at the start of the season from Detroit for Austin Meadows, who, although he has been injured, is hitting a more pedestrian .250 with the 0 homers and an OPS plus of just 99. So right about league average. So the interesting story, I think the low exit velocity, most softly hit home run in baseball history as far as has been recorded thus far, but not to show up Paredes and his 3 home run game against the Yankees. Good for him. I always liked him as a Tigers prospect and hope he continues to do well. All right, on to something to honk about. Today, that topic is Shohei Ohtani and whether or not he really is a problem for fantasy baseball. A little bit of statistical background. Ohtani is currently hitting 260 with 13 homers, which is about a pace for 35-ish home runs. And he has an OPS of 822, which is 32% above league average. Extremely good. That's as a hitter, as a designated hitter. He's also started 12 games as a pitcher with a 6-win, 4-loss record, 2.90 ERA, and a 1.01 WHIP. And he has nearly 12 strikeouts per 9 innings. That's actually 11.9. He also just had the best game of his career as a pitcher, striking out 13 batters in 8 innings of 2-hit ball. He is currently the number 1 player in fantasy baseball for points leagues by a wide margin when you combine both his hitting and his pitching. He has so far this year, as of late June 2022, he has 434 points. 42% of those points are accrued as a pitcher, 58% as a hitter. So what does that equate to if you were like a normal player and only did one thing or the other thing? Well, it's really the equivalent of having Sandy Alcantara, a pitcher from the Miami Marlins, who is the number 2 pitcher right now, right behind Shane McClanahan. It's the equivalent of having Sandy Alcantara as a pitcher and having either your choice, Freddie Freeman or Anthony Rizzo as a hitter. They are the number 13 and number 14 hitters in points leagues right now. So you really have one of the very best pitchers combined with an extremely good hitter into one player. And this makes him significantly better than any other player in fantasy baseball, and honestly, in real baseball as well. So he is currently listed as the number 11 player in Roto League baseball. Those are leagues that are based on categories instead of points. And that may be partly because Roto leagues may tend to more often to be weekly leagues. I think that as we talk about this a little further, we found out there's a big difference in whether he's in a daily league or a weekly league. So first, to explain that, if you're not familiar with fantasy baseball, a daily league means that you are able to make changes to your lineup, moving players around on and off your roster, in and out of the lineup every single day of the week. In a weekly league, you can only make changes one time a week. So the essential difference there when it comes to Ohtani is that if you were in a weekly league, you would have to choose whether he was being slotted in as a pitcher for the week or as a hitter for the week. And he's doing so well in both categories, you could choose which you needed more help in. Whereas in a daily league, you can move him into a position as a hitter on days that he hits and as a pitcher on days that he pitches. So you have more flexibility in a daily league. So a few points that I want to make. First, there are advantages. What are the advantages or the things where someone might think it's unfair to have Ohtani? If you have a daily league, there is quite an advantage because it is like having an extra roster slot. Because essentially, the way I look at it is you need to carry one less starting pitcher on your roster because you can consider him your designated hitter and then swap him in as a pitcher when you need him. So if you normally carried 6 or 7 starting pitchers or even 8, depending on your league, you could carry one less starting pitcher. And that gives you a little more flexibility in your lineup to carry a reliever or another position player. So he does give you extra roster flexibility in a daily league. And the other advantage, of course, is that you get to count his points both for pitching and hitting as long as you move him into the appropriate slot in your lineup. Now, on days, I will note that on days when he's pitching, you do have to choose one or the other. You either have to have him in as a pitcher or a hitter. You don't get to count both on the days that he's pitching. Anyhow, in a daily points league, Ohtani is far and away the number one player. There is no one even close because as I said earlier, it's like having Sandy Alcantara, one of the very best pitchers this year, and either Anthony Rizzo or Freddie Freeman, a top hitter as well. So the thing is this fair? Is this fair? Should you try to fix it in fantasy baseball to be more fair? Well, I guess it depends on what you think is fair. These advantages are in fantasy baseball. Yes, they are also advantages in real life. The Los Angeles Angels have essentially an extra roster spot because, again, think of Ohtani as taking up your DH roster slot, but you can also have him pitch on days when he pitches. So you have to carry really one less starting pitcher. That means you've got one more reliever or one more position player in your bench. It is the same in real life. The Angels have an advantage by having this player. It's also the same in real life that he is a great hitter and he's a great pitcher. Why? That's the way it is. So I would argue that there really is nothing that you need to fix, because if you want your fantasy league to reflect the real life player and the advantages that his team has in real life, then that should also be reflected in fantasy. I also would say that it's not a given that having him on your team makes you the number one team in your league. Now, I will say that I did have him last year when he had his breakout season, and I did finish the regular season tied for first place in my league. Didn't do so well in the playoffs. But this year, the person who has them on their team is certainly headed toward the playoffs, but is not currently the number one team. So it is an advantage, sure, but it doesn't mean you're going to be the best team just because you have them. You still have to actively manage your team. You need to be a good manager, and you need to work with other players in and out of your lineup and your roster. So I guess my personal point of view is I don't think there is anything to fix. I think we're playing fantasy to be as close to real baseball as it can be. And you taking advantage of Ohtani in both ways as a hitter and a pitcher is fair. That's my opinion. But I will concede that if you want to fix it, if you want to try to make it more fair and treat him as a pitcher or a hitter, there are several ways that you could approach it. Now, one would be in a daily league, if your fantasy interface allows you to do this, and I don't know if ESPN does or if some of the other places for fantasy baseball allow this, but if you're allowed to break him into two players, if you could have him as a hitter separate and as a pitcher separately, then you could draft them separately as though he were two players, and the same team might get both halves. But if they did, he'd take up two roster spots, or maybe two different teams would get him. One would get him as a pitcher and one would get him as a hitter. So if that is allowed in your league, that would be one way to solve the issue. Another possibility, which you could simply do on your own in a daily league again, is that you could say that whomever drafts him has to drop some other player and maintain an empty roster spot all season. That way you don't have that advantage of having essentially an extra roster spot by forcing the team to have one less roster spot than all the other teams in your league. You really couldn't police that, though. I don't think a league commissioner would want to do that. It would be on the honor system. And frankly, I'm not sure I feel like that's really fair anyhow. The easiest solution is to have a weekly league, because in the weekly league, you have to lock him in as either a hitter or a pitcher for the whole week. Now, granted, you have the advantage of being able to choose. Most of the time, I think you would pick him as a hitter because he does overall accumulate more points as a hitter. But depending on your needs in your fantasy league and what you're trying to accumulate, like, are you trying to accumulate strikeouts, or are you trying to accumulate just regular points? There may be times when using him as a pitcher would be to your advantage. Now, there is one thing about using him as a pitcher. He does not pitch as often as most starting pitchers. Most starting pitchers pitch every fifth day, which means they several times a season will get 2 starts during a week, which would be really advantageous. Ohtani typically pitches every 6th day, so he really only gets 1 start a week. And maybe there'd be one time the whole season where he would start twice in the same week, but that would be quite unlikely. That's my overall on Ohtani. I personally think it's fine because his advantages in fantasy mirror his advantages in the real game. I do understand, though, going to a weekly league would be the easiest way to solve the issue if you feel that there's an issue to solve. Next up, the shift and what a ban will mean for hitters and pitchers. Well, shift usage was up from around 10% in 2015 to 37% early in 2022. The Dodgers are one team that has used shifting extensively, as much as 55 to 60% of the time. Now, according to athletic.com, 51% of all balls put in play last year, not counting home runs, were hit into the shift. 51% of all balls put in play were hit into a shift last year. And per sabermetrics guru Bill James, roughly, and I'm paraphrasing here, roughly 4,800 hits were taken away by the shift, and roughly 3,900 hits were given away. What he means by that is that sometimes the shift works, right? The player hits it toward the shift, toward all the fielders who are bunched together. But sometimes they hit it the other way and there are no fielders there, and a ball that could have normally been expected to have been an out if you weren't shifting suddenly becomes a hit. But it really works out to be the math there. The shift is successful 22% more of the time than it is not. So, 4,800 hits taken away, 3,900 extra hits allowed, you're still coming out 22% ahead. It's still working, and that's why teams do it. And I think most people are familiar with the shift. Sometimes it's more extreme on certain batters, but it is almost always on left-handed pull hitters. They tend to be left-handed power hitters. So what they'll do is move the shortstop around to behind second base. He might even play where the second baseman normally plays, kind of between second and first. The second baseman will often act as a fourth outfielder and play kind of in shallow right field. The third baseman then is typically left alone on the left side of the infield. They might play approximately where the shortstop plays. So why is it done mostly against left-handed hitters? One reason is that you have to keep somebody near the first base bag. So if you're trying to shift on a right-handed hitter, which does occasionally happen, sometimes you'll shift on a righty, but you have to keep somebody near first base in order, if a hitter hits the ball, you need to be able on the ground, you need to be able to throw to first base to get them out. So it opens up a really big hole if you try to shift on a right-handed hitter between first base and second base, a really big hole. And right-handed hitters are far more likely to be successful hitting against the shift than lefties are. So that's certainly a big reason for it. But it does work. The other thing is that almost 30 points of batting average are lost between facing a shift and not facing a shift. So when facing a shift, batting average is around, I think this is based on last year's data, around 220. And when not facing a shift, batting average jumps to more like 250. So there is a significant downgrade in batting average. Significantly more outs are made when the shift is in place. So you can understand why teams do it. And this has not been stated a reason that I've read. This is something more in my thinking. Another reason that you might be more apt to do it to a left-hander is a left-hander is one step closer to first base to begin with, because they're batting from the left-hand side of the plate and first base is on that side of the plate. They really have kind of an extra step advantage. Since the left-handed batter has a slight advantage in getting to first base anyway, this helps counteract that. So that could be a reason. So banning the shift. So the shift is going to be banned next year in 2023. And according to Sports Illustrated, this will put a premium on athleticism and incentivizes the hitter to put the ball in play. Now they may have gotten that from MLB. I don't know if it really does that or not. To me, the hitter is incentivized to put the ball in play with the shift because they should be able to hit the ball the opposite way. If you're a major league player playing at this level, you should be able to beat the shift. Apparently, people don't. I don't know if the reason is that they simply can't learn to hit it the other way, which that just seems unlikely. I think it's probably more likely, especially with the power hitters, you're getting paid to hit a home run. If you hit a home run by pulling the ball into the right field corner, then it doesn't really matter where the fielders are standing if you're trying to hit a home run. And since that's where your paycheck is coming, maybe you simply don't have an incentive to try to get a little dribbler single down the third baseline when it's more important for you to try to hit a long ball. So that could be some of the logic involved. I don't know. Anyway, so here's the deal with the ban. So beginning in 2023, teams will no longer be allowed to have more than 2 infielders on one side of second base. So that means essentially your first baseman, second baseman need to play on the right-hand side of the infield as they historically have, and your shortstop and your third baseman need to stay on the left-hand side of the infield. Now, they might be scrunched up real close to second base, but they have to stay on the left-hand side of second base. And the other part of this rule is that no infielder will be able to play in the outfield grass. You'll have to stay on the infield if you're an infielder. So essentially, we're eliminating that shallow right fielder, that second baseman playing in shallow right field and acting as another outfielder. Another rule change that is being considered is a maximum depth for outfielders. This is still in the planning stages, but they expect it to be tried in spring training games. And the idea is that to make the game more exciting, you want to see more doubles and triples, balls, say, hitting the gap, balls getting to the wall. What they have found is that for every 10 feet shallower than outfielders play, the rate of doubles increases by 2%. So we've seen a big fall in doubles and triples over the last years as teams have relied more and more on analytics and outfielders have tended to play deeper. So the way they would do this is they would probably do something, if you think about like the 3-point arc in the NBA, the line painted on the floor so players know where they can shoot a 3-pointer. You could do something similar to that in a major league park. You could paint a line in the outfield, and the outfielders would have to start the at-bat by being inside that line, meaning they couldn't play too deep. They'd have to play inside the designated line. One thing that I think about the shift that I find interesting, I'm not really a big fan of shifting. It certainly has hurt some players. Anthony Rizzo and Joey Gallo might be good examples of left-handed pull hitters who the shift is likely hurt. I'm not really a big fan of it in general, but I do think it's interesting. What will happen with a shift ban? Well, there will be more balls hit fair for base hits. Batting averages will go up. Pitchers' hits allowed will go up. You would think that earned runs would have to go up somewhat. So those things would all change. But the one thing I think about is MLB says they want to shorten the game. They're always talking the game is too long, the game is too long, we have to shorten the game. And I know they're working on things to try to address that. However, if you're giving up more hits by not allowing the shift, certainly that will make the game longer. So I don't think it fits into that idea of shortening the game. It does go back to more, what you would call classic positioning of fielders, where they would typically remain in their normal positions on the field. But I don't think it's going to help shorten the length of the game. I think it's going to counteract that and actually lengthen the game a little. But perhaps other proposals that are coming will be enough to offset that. All right. So it's time for our Blimerick, our baseball limerick that we have every broadcast. And this Blimerick is about the shift. With a lefty up, we shift to the right. No balls get through. Our defense is tight. With an outfield of 4, they're unlikely to score. We'll win the game to our fans' delight. Next up is our blast from the past. Today, we're going to talk about Tino Martinez as our blast from the past because 2 reasons. He began his career with the Mariners, and it's a Mariners cap that we have for the cap of the day. And he was a left-handed pull hitter, someone who likely would have been hurt by the shift if the shift had been employed during his playing days. It was not so popular back then. The game was not so much of an analytics game. So let's talk about Tino Martinez. So Tino Martinez played for Seattle, the New York Yankees, and toward the end of his career, the St. Louis Cardinals. He played for 6 seasons with Seattle, and he was quite a good first baseman, quite good offensively. He batted .265 during those 6 years with the Mariners, with a .334 on base percentage, which is solid, and an .801 on base plus slugging OPS for an overall OPS plus of 112, meaning 12% above league average, which is a very good player. After he went on to the Yankees in 1996, his batting average went up a little bit, but his overall OPS plus was still 113. So 13% above league average versus 12% above league average for his total offensive output. He had some very good years. He was twice named an All-Star. And in 1997, which was one of his years with the Yankees, he came in second in MVP voting. But let's look at his best year as a Mariner was 1995, when he had 35 doubles, 31 home runs, batted .293, and had an OPS of 920, 35% above league average. In 1997, with the Yankees, which was his actually best overall season, he had 31 doubles, 44 homers, 141 runs batted in, hit .296 with a .371 on base percentage, 948 OPS, and that's 43% above league average. So that was really an outstanding season. That was the year he was an All-Star, won a Silver Slugger Award for first base, and he was number 2 in the MVP voting. So let's take a look at whether or not he really was a pull hitter, because there are some great stats at baseballreference.com that show this. Under advanced batting, there's a batted ball section, and it tells you what percentage of hits were pulled, were hit toward the center of the field, and were hit to the opposite field. So in his total career, Tino Martinez hit just under 17% of balls to the opposite field. So really fairly rare that he hit the opposite way, fairly rare that he hit it toward third base or toward left field. He pulled the ball a third of the time, 33% of the time he would have hit it to right, since he's a left-handed batter. And he most often hit it toward the center of the field, roughly 50% of the time. So if you were going to shift on him, you probably would have bunched your fielders more toward the center of the field, but certainly you would have left the third base side wide open, because he rarely hit it that direction. So he's probably a classic candidate for the kind of player that you would have done a shift on. So it seems like an appropriate player to have today for our blast from the past. So that's all for today, my friends. Join us next time, because honestly, what can be better than talking baseball? Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Phil Estruth Harrison. We'll see you next time on My Week in Baseball.